Hi, everyone. I am very excited to have a longtime associate and friend of mine. Sukanya, you and I started really our regulatory affairs career together in Eli Lilly in India. So I'm doubly excited to be talking to you today.
Absolutely.
Welcome. And I'd like to just introduce Sukanya quickly. Our guest today is Sukanya Choudhury, Executive Vice President of Regulatory Affairs at GSK India, and a recognized leader in regulatory policy, innovation, and industry advocacy. A pharmacist by training with more than 25 years of experience across pharmaceuticals and medical devices, she has led regulatory organizations spanning India, Latin America, the Middle East, and Southeast Asia. Beyond her corporate role, Sukanya plays an influential part in shaping India's regulatory landscape through leadership positions with ISCR, EFPIA, and OPPI. She champions innovation, research, and talent development across the healthcare ecosystem. And today, with you, Sukanya, we're going to discuss an important topic because CDSCO has not just introduced a new reporting requirement. It is probably the first time that we are looking at a formal risk-based post-approval change management framework. I'm really looking forward to talking to you and discussing this subject with you today. Welcome.
Thank you, Jacob, for having me here today. Like you, I'm excited to be in this forum with you because we both learned the ropes of regulatory together, blundering along in the early stages of our career with Eli Lilly. So, yeah, totally excited to be joining you today in this forum. Thank you for having me. And just at the outset, I would just like to state, of course, we will get into a deeper discussion on the topic, but I just want to, be upfront in stating the interpretation and the expression of views, during this discussion is strictly mine and not linked to my organization.
Of course, thank you. I would also like to clarify that the conversation is less about explaining the draft and more about what this means for India's evolution towards life cycle regulation, pharmaceutical quality systems, and global regulatory convergence. So, with that, let's start. Maybe I'll lead in, Sukanya, with some of my thoughts. Post approval change management typically will seem like it's sitting in regulatory CMC circles, yet it sits at the heart of quality and supply for us. Every product that reaches patients continues to evolve after approval. Manufacturing processes are optimized, analytical methods improve, suppliers change, packaging is upgraded. We can keep going on and on about the changes that continually happen, and companies continually seek ways to improve robustness and efficiency overall. And the challenge for regulators globally has always been about balancing two objectives, encouraging continuous improvement while maintaining confidence that product quality, safety, efficacy remains unchanged. And what makes this draft interesting is that it definitely shows India moving towards a more structured, risk-based lifecycle management approach. And so let's begin with that big picture. Most of the regulatory professionals would have read this notification and reviewed it. How much have we reflected on the policy objective behind it? Looking beyond the wording itself, why and what is CDSCO ultimately trying to achieve? Is it primarily about efficiency, regulatory oversight, or international harmonization, or perhaps all of these together? Could you share a little bit about what your thinking is in what CDSCO is trying to solve with this amendment?
Absolutely, Jacob. So I think there is, as you said, a very clear recognition that manufacturing variations and process improvements are real for the products that are marketed in the country. And these variations, whether it is changes in excipients, processes, packaging, equipment, has an impact potential impact on the quality, efficacy, safety of the product that is on the market. Therefore, there is a definite need to have a structured evaluation procedure for these kind of changes, whether they are major, minor, or moderate. We'll come to that later. Now, the broad principles of this existed to some extent in the regulations for imported products. They were covered in, there's a schedule called Schedule D1, and there are certain principles that the imported products need to adhere to. And there were guidelines that were issued way back in 2008 for biologicals and vaccines.
Okay.
So, why are nuances of post-approval change management within the regulations, but probably not so well embedded in a structured manner? So what problem CDSCO is probably trying to solve or fix now is to get it integrated into the new drug and clinical trial rules and in the drug and cosmetic rules, so that there's a harmonized approach of post-approval change management across categories of drugs.
And if we look historically, India has certainly had mechanisms like what you just now outlined to manage post-approval changes. And companies have been interacting with CDSCO on manufacturing, quality, lifecycle update for years. What feels different here is the introduction of risk-based categories. Do you agree? I mean, linked to regulatory expectations.
Yes, for small molecules. Space categorization existed for biologicals and vaccines. So there is a very robust guideline in the country, which was issued in 2008. And then it was in 2024. This guideline was initially historically based on the Health Canada guidelines. And now it has also embedded principles of the WHO post-approval change guidelines. So here the risk-based approach was already being followed. But for small molecules, I think it was a one-size-fits-all. Irrespective of the kind of change, they would all go through the same review process. And this is a definite change, which we expect to see once this draft regulation becomes effective in the country.
Sure.
So I think that's a very, very positive change for all of us.
And, one of the themes we see globally is a gradual shift from transaction-based regulation, where it's interpreted internally or then negotiated with the agency, towards a science and risk-based regulation. So the language in the draft, particularly the distinction between substantial, moderate, and minimal impact, sounds familiar to any one of us who have worked with FDA, EMA, ICH, or WHO frameworks. Now, if we take that idea a step further, alignment could be the beginning. It does not necessarily mean identical implementation. So different regulators, we could continue and discuss about how Sentinel agencies look at it, how APAC regulators in the region look at it. But different regulators often embrace similar principles while applying them a bit differently in practice. From your perspective, where do you see the strongest area of alignment with established international models and where India's approach still remains distinct? For example, where do you see similarities or divergence from global, or do you see them? Firstly, do you see, and if you do, then what are they?
I think the first most fundamental similarity is using a risk-based classification, categorizing changes as level 1, 2, and 3, and a recognition that every change does not have the same impact on the end product. And accordingly, the level of documentation, the level of data generation, and the level of regulatory review will vary. So this, in my mind, is the first similarity versus most of the global agencies across the world. The divergence, I would say, is firstly, I think, but that is not something which is to be worried about, is a bit of how you use the terminology, because every country will have its own way of classification. Of course, the Indian terminology of level 1 and 2 and 3 is not identical to the way US or EMA classifies it. And so it may create some confusion somewhere. But it is similar to the WHO or the Health Canadian classification, where the major change level 1 versus level 2 in, say, an EMA or something. So terminology is different, but that is fine. The second area is currently I don't think India has full-fledgedly adopted ICH Q12, although the principles are embedded. Because India continues to be an observer, I'm sure there will be a time when it will become a full adopter of ICH Q12.
Sure.
There is some variability still in the timelines and the procedure of review. The way this is handled across the various divisions and the various types of products in CDSCO, which I would say seen significant improvement and predictability in the last 1 or 2 years, if I may say so.
Yeah.
But it is still not a 30-day review or a 60-day review or something like that. So I think there is some differences in the procedural aspects of the review, although the classification is similar. And the digital infrastructure is also maturing. The Indian Health Agency portal, Sugam,
Right.
has gone live. It's handling all the post-approval changes currently. But I think it can be further strengthened to exactly reflect individual categories and guidelines for certain categories of products. So we are on this journey, and I'm pretty confident that we will see quite significant changes in the coming couple of years.
I think I did come across even a tender bid that was floated for end-to-end digitalization, yes. And that's fantastic. I mean, I was very proud to see that. Would you want to expand a little bit more on level 1, level 2, 3, and what they really mean from an industry perspective, or do you think we have covered it?
So I think maybe I'll just touch it so that we are clear on what it means. So the regulators clearly recognize level 1 changes as major quality changes, which they believe can have a substantial impact on the product quality, efficacy, or safety, and therefore data needs to be generated to demonstrate that a level 1 change has no major impact on the final delivery of the product. The data could be quality CMC data, the data could even sometimes be clinical data, depends on the kind of change. For example, if it's a manufacturing site change, then probably, just generation of data to show equivalence of the two sites is adequate. If it is a complete change in the dosage form, or then if the manufacturing comparability fails, then there may be need to generate clinical data as well.
Yeah.
So level 1 changes are major changes. Okay. Now, if I move to the level 2 changes, which are moderate quality changes, so there is a moderate risk that the change may impact the identity, strength, quality, potency, efficacy of the product. Then too, the regulators therefore believe that in this case too, a formal regulatory approval is needed, yes. Just like it is required for the major changes.
Yes.
Now, these changes are more change in analytical procedures, changes in specifications, which could actually be maybe relaxing some specification. So they are typically data generation, batch analysis data is adequate to demonstrate that the change is not having a significant impact on the finished product.
Right.
Then we have the level 3 changes or minor changes. This is more for the awareness of the regulator in terms of the change that is being made. For example, I may have up where today I test it as per in-house specifications, and there is a pharmacopoeial specification now. And as pharmacopoeial method, I may want to adopt that in my product, which typically is anyway going to be a validated method. So the risk is much, much lower. So therefore, these are the kinds of changes which would typically sit under the level 3 bucket. Interestingly, India also has a level 4 category, which is not in this regulation.
Okay.
But it is there in the biological guidance, which is more editorial changes, really minor changes, which can be managed through the site documentation and can be submitted at once in 3 years for imported products during renewal of licenses, or be visible to inspectors during inspection of a site in India.
Thank you.
So pretty clear categorization of changes now.
No, that's great. I was just planning to ask you a few examples, and thanks for sharing them, because that really clarifies in a more understandable way. Sukanya, one aspect of the draft that caught my attention is the specific treatment of shelf life changes.
I will say shelf life has a direct impact on the patient who receives. There is a safety aspect involved for the patient at the end of the supply chain. So a product which is at the end or edge of its shelf life still needs to meet all its quality specifications. So if there is any miscalculation, any underestimation of degradation, it means that the patient will receive a product which either is subpotent, subtherapeutic, or it has degradants, potentially toxic products with no visible indicator. Correct? So therefore, a lot of the time, we don't, at the time that we bring a product to the market or we make a change, we don't always have the full shelf life in a real time setting, which is considered the gold standard, available. And we extrapolate the data from accelerated data and intermediate data. And whenever we do that, there is always that slight risk that remains. So the regulators really would like to assess what is available, basis which the extrapolation of shelf life is being made, and therefore they would like to review that data before giving approval for shelf life. And then if you bring in India into the picture, we have to put an additional layer of caution, right? Because a significant proportion of the drug will eventually reach the patient after a very long distribution chain across geographically diverse conditions. And sometimes it may stay in the retail counters for extended periods of time. And all the retail counters may not necessarily be very strongly temperature controlled. So all these factors finally needs to be considered when permitting a particular shelf life of the product, because it has a direct impact on the patient who gets the product at the end of the day.
Yeah, because I think this is where I was trying to lead it. In India, one of the points that you raised is about the complex supply chain dynamics and management of maintaining the integrity of supply. Second is we are also in zone 4B. The type of controls that we have is not necessarily very visible, easily to trace. And for example, in FDA, shelf life extension sits in the annual report bucket, and EMA type 1B, it's moderate. PMDA in Japan, it's no fixed classification, but it's one of the most common changes handled through PACM. So that's the reason I asked this question. Thanks for sharing about the point about how in India probably the focus would be a little more stringent. And it's not surprising that it has been given a special mention in this. What I also see is every multinational company already operate mature global post-approval change management systems based on FDA, EMA, WHO. They may already have global change control boards, risk assessment tools, standardized classifications. How should these organizations now think about India within their broader global framework? How should maybe regulatory teams think about India if they're already running post-approval change systems based on US FDA, EMA, or WHO principles?
So I think the same principles now need to also get extended and expanded to India. So at the time that an assessment of a change is being done to kind of assess the category that it's going to fit in for US or Europe, which is done much earlier than the actual dispatch of the package. So I think the central teams need to be able to send high-level information to their Indian partners to do that assessment versus the guidelines even before the central dispatch or the central authoring of the package, so that an integrated single package or data package is authored, which simplifies life for everybody. So the first thing is do a proactive assessment of the particular change as per the Indian guidelines, take in the input from the market as to whether it is supplyable after approval or supplyable after submission, and build in that into the plan of implementation. And the second thing is what I've seen is typically for products which are coming from multinational organizations and manufactured outside the country, it really helps to have the approval in a stringent regulatory market, especially the source country, to accompany it. If the assessment report is available, that too helps in getting the approval, the review in a very streamlined manner. And finally, they need to build in time and resources for responding to questions.
Yeah.
Because these are structured submissions with structured packages, and there will be questions issued a couple of months down the line post submission. So the resources need to be allocated to respond to these questions in a timely manner when it has been raised by the Indian authority.
And, I'd like to sidestep slightly. And as I was thinking about what you were saying, often the most difficult questions emerge in the gray zone where scientific judgment, regulatory interpretation, they intersect. I'm also probably thinking about global companies already have a very strong, structured way to approach PACM. I don't know if I'm thinking about companies that don't have a global presence, maybe just in India, for India. Do you think such companies could struggle, maybe in terms of forcing ambiguity or interpreting or having some practical friction after implementation?
Whenever a new process gets rolled out, there is expected some amount of challenges or ambiguity. I think every change comes with that, and that needs to be built into the entire rollout period.
Yeah.
So the good news is that the Indian regulators are quite approachable. So it is not like a black box or there is no way of seeking clarification.
Sure.
So there is an option of reaching out to the regulators to seek clarification. In my opinion, once this regulation is effective, takes effect, there absolutely needs to be more detailed, granular guidance to accompany this.
Yeah.
And there needs to be a period of hypercare
Yes.
during which the companies can reach out to them when they are not very clear on some of the interpretation. And when absolutely they still continue to be unclear, I would say to err on the side of caution and apply for approval till we get clarity.
Yeah, that makes sense. Because in a risk-based framework, even two competent professionals may occasionally reach different conclusions about the same change, right?
Absolutely.
And this naturally raises questions, around inspection, regulatory accountability. But in terms of process itself, what happens if a company classifies a change as minor, but CDSCO later concludes it should have been moderate or major? What's from a process perspective? How does it work with CDSCO?
It would, honestly, we've not really had an experience of this, so it's just hypothesis.
Okay.
So this is quite tricky, right? Because if CDSCO classifies it as major and the change has already been implemented, then if the product has already not been marketed, then you will need to actually hold that product until the approval has been secured from CDSCO. If the change has already been implemented, then there has to be a discussion, because in principle, then you're going ahead on a unapproved variation, which is not a place that anybody wants to be in.
Yes.
That's why I'm emphasizing on the need to engage proactively with CDSCO before you go ahead and implement a change. If there is any risk of that change to be interpreted as a major or a moderate change by the regulators. But otherwise, if you've implemented it in manufacturing but not marketed it, you just need to probably ring fence the product, wait for approval, have a chat with CDSCO as to whether we can put that product on the market, although it was manufactured before the approval came in. But there is no straight answers to this one.
Another crack I can think of is from mature PACM systems globally, where no approval seems to be required. It does not mean no documentation. In fact, some would even argue the opposite, that the burden of documentation becomes even more important because companies must be prepared to justify their decisions retrospectively. So, do you have any thoughts on what document package should companies maintain internally, even when prior approval is not required? I know it depends upon the change, but any broad guidelines come to your mind?
So it does depend on the change, and I think there are even those changes that don't need approval. It is very clearly defined on what is the kind of data that needs to be generated and kept on record with the companies, right? Is there in the Indian biological guidelines, is there in the international guidelines. So people need to review what is the requirement that is defined and then generate data and build those document packages internally. Level 3 packages anyway will get submitted to the health authority. So it's just the level 4, which are absolutely administrative which does not need a submission. But I totally agree with you. The emphasis and the importance of having the right documentation records, which form the basis of taking a decision or why this change does not need prior approval, is an absolute must.
Yes.
Before progressing in implementation of a change like this.
Yeah. So about timing, Sukanya, stepping back, obviously this draft, it appears intentionally principle based to provide flexibility, but it also creates variability in interpretation. Like you said, we will expect guidance documents, decision tree perhaps, and essentially companions to the regulation itself. So do you have any idea about the timing? Do you think CDSCO will have a time frame for publishing detailed guidance, examples, classification, or frameworks?
They have not come back to us yet on this, but I think this is work in progress. But we would, as regulatory professionals, definitely reach out to CDSCO to kind of set up a group with the participation of the industry at the time that the guidance is being drafted. So that the inputs can be provided upfront and guidance is also in principally aligned to the major existing regulatory guidance documents that exist across geographies.
Yeah.
So, because as I said, I think the effort should be not to reinvent the wheel completely and have multiple versions of the same dossier, but one dossier which fits all markets should be the goal, and for which there should be similarities, because finally the change is the same.
Yes.
The fundamental data requirements and the fundamental data to demonstrate that the change is not impacting the product should be the same. So as long as the guidance is in the same principle, it should be good for India as well. So definitely this is a stage when industry and the CDSCO needs to work together to kind of start building the guidance based on the international guidance that exists, and also set up the Sugam platform for all these changes.
Sure.
And probably allow industry to test some of these cases in a sandbox environment. Yes. So that we can pick up the things that need fixing upfront before it becomes the formal effective ways of working.
And the reason I asked is because post-approval changes don't happen like after a cutoff point, or we can't decide. There'll be a lot in progress right now. So I was trying to think about what should regulatory professionals in India begin doing right now, even during the draft stage. Like, for example, if you were sitting today with the head of regulatory CMC and, advising a lead, is there any immediate readiness guidance that comes to your mind for organizations to keep in mind?
So I think the teams should start evaluating the changes that are planned. The ones that are already in process are going to get evaluated as per the current standards. If at the point that this comes into effect, there may be needs for submitting some documentation. But what I would tell the regulatory CMC lead is to start including India in discussion for all the planned variations from today, now that the draft is in place. Ensuring that when the CMC package dispatch is planned, it comes with all these other parameters like assessment reports, source country approval, and build in time for the responding to questions. Be prepared for questions. It's not, I put in a package and at the end of a time period, I will get an approval. The review is becoming more structured and there will be definite questions which they can expect.
And the other side of the coin, what would be your recommendation to CDSCO? Because we are talking a lot of what industry should be doing, but I think it would be good for us to also let CDSCO know what our thoughts as an industry is.
So I think the first thing is to have a forum where we can consult with CDSCO on how this guidance and how this is going to work, where we can actually proactively share inputs. There are a couple of areas which come to my mind straight up. The first is we are very clear that biologicals and vaccines are new drugs perpetually in India, and therefore there is a CDSCO review process for post-approval changes for all these products throughout the life cycle of the product, whether it is locally manufactured or imported. We are also pretty clear that the guidance that will get issued will be applicable for all our products which are in the imported portfolio, irrespective of whether it is in the new drug category or not.
Mhm.
But we also have products which are locally manufactured new drugs. And typically, the license maintenance of a locally manufactured product after 4 years moves from CDSCO submissions to state authority submissions. So, how would life cycle management for these products be managed
Mhm.
for post approval changes? There are certain post approval changes currently when it's a new manufacturing site, an intermediate site, for example, gets added for a product.
Mhm.
Currently, a post approval change is progressed, an amendment of the marketing authorization is progressed for imported products of the registration certificate, an import license may be progressed, and there are multiple times the same package gets submitted to CDSCO for review multiple times by multiple reviewers. Can this be streamlined to one review and one approval, with the rest of the amendments being administrative procedures? So, some of these clarifications can be, if we have a conversation and engagement with CDSCO proactively,
Yes.
can probably be built in
Yeah.
when the guidance is being authored. So, I'm really looking forward for a collaboration with CDSCO and the industry
Yeah.
for this to seamless change in the ways of working for the end-to-end post-approval change management for all categories of products that are in the market in India.
That's true. Yeah. So publish detailed classification guidance, probably even create a formal decision tree, a simple tree like, does the change affect critical quality attributes? Does it affect validated process parameters? And so on and so forth. And establish a QA repository. What do you think? Is that possible? Like somewhere where people can look at a living Q&A database. And definitely introducing a transitional implementation period is a must.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Aligning.
And one point is, can a reliance mechanism be also built in, because
Right.
for post approval changes, because life cycle management submissions are heavy.
Yes.
They are right.
Yeah.
So can in some principles of reliance be also applied here,
Yes.
so that it's efficient for the applicant, it is also efficient for the regulator, so that they're not reinventing the wheel multiple times.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's important because that will show that we are adopting, or rather aligning with the ICHQ12 concepts when we go down that path. Thank you, Sukanya. This is a very timely discussion that we could have, and we'll be closely watching the journey both by the regulator and the industry. Your comments and this discussion, I hope, would not only bring clarity but help the community think more deeply as to how to help ourselves, but also help the regulator and help the country obtain, receive, and enforce this change in the right way. So thank you. Any closing words, any thoughts you have before we sign off?
No, thank you, Jacob, for inviting me. This was really a very positive change that we have seen in the Indian regulatory environment. And we are seeing a lot of changes, which is very encouraging to harmonize, to try and convert, where we are seeing to have the same standards
Yes.
in the country, which is good news for India. So really happy to be joining the session with you today and looking forward for connecting again.
Yes, thank you. I look forward to it too. Bye bye.
Thanks. Bye, Jacob.